Something big is changing over America right now, and it is not one storm. It is not one cold front. It is not one terrible afternoon of heat. A much larger weather pattern is beginning to take control, and over the next several days, it could decide where dangerous heat builds, where the ground begins drying out, where storms keep returning, and which parts of the country finally get the first small taste of fall. The strange part is that the United States may soon feel like two completely different countries. Across parts of the Northeast, cooler air could hold temperatures closer to normal or even a little below normal, but hundreds of miles away, across the plains, Southwest, and parts of the South, the exact opposite is happening. There, the atmosphere is preparing to trap heat, and this could become much more serious than another ordinary hot August afternoon. Federal forecasters are watching the possibility of a long-lasting extreme heat event across a large part of the southern United States during the final week of August. Some areas could climb above 100 degrees. Where the air is humid, it could feel like 110 degrees or even hotter. But the temperature is only the beginning, because the same pattern could also dry the ground very quickly. Parts of the plains and Mississippi Valley have already been missing rain. Add strong sunshine, add several more hot days, take away the rain, and a landscape that looks mostly normal today can begin changing surprisingly fast. Grass turns brown, farm fields lose moisture, small streams drop, plants begin struggling, dry brush becomes easier to burn. And suddenly, one hot weather pattern begins creating several different problems at the same time. That is why this forecast deserves attention. This is not just about whether you will need the air conditioner. It is about what happens when weather refuses to move. A storm comes and goes. A cold front usually keeps traveling. But a stuck weather pattern can repeat the same conditions again and again. And the longer it stays, the bigger the effects become. There's also something important I want to mention before we go deeper into this forecast. Watching dangerous weather is useful. Knowing what is coming is useful. But when a storm, flood, wildfire, blackout, tornado, hurricane, or another disaster actually affects your area, the question quickly changes from what is the forecast to is my family ready? That is why we created the Family Disaster Survival System. It is a practical guide designed to help families build a real emergency plan before something goes wrong. What to prepare. What your family should have ready. What to do if the power goes out. What to think about before you need to leave your home, and how to avoid trying to figure everything out while everyone around you is already panicking. If you want to get prepared before the next emergency reaches your area, you can find the Family Disaster Survival System through the link in the description and the top comment. Now let us get back to what is happening, because the national weather map is beginning to look very unusual. While heat builds across the south and central United States, parts of the Northeast may begin moving in the other direction. That does not mean winter is suddenly arriving. It does not even mean everyone will need a jacket. But it does mean the giant blanket of summer heat will not cover America evenly. Instead, the country is beginning to split, hot in one region, cooler in another, drying out in one area, potentially wetter along parts of the East Coast. And sitting between those two different worlds will be the part of the country where fronts and storms may keep forming. Think about a giant blanket stretched across a bed. Pull one side hard enough and the whole blanket changes shape. One part becomes tight, another part folds, another part is left exposed. The atmosphere can behave in a similar way. A huge area of warm air is expected to build over the western and central parts of the country. That warm zone bends the air around it. On one side, weather systems have to travel north. On another, cooler air may find a path south. The result is not one simple line moving across the map. It becomes a giant curve. And that curve can keep entire regions trapped under similar weather for days. This is why one person in Texas could be dealing with afternoon temperatures around 100 degrees while someone around the Great Lakes begins watching for cooler Canadian air. At the same time, someone near the northeast coast could be dealing with rain from a slow-moving front. Someone in the desert southwest could still be dealing with brutal heat. All of them are experiencing different parts of the same national pattern. And that is what makes the situation so interesting. The computer forecasts agree on the basic shape. As we move deeper into the final week of August, warmer than normal conditions are favored across a huge part of the West, central United States, and South. The strongest warm signal is focused around parts of the southern plains. The Northeast is one of the important exceptions. That region has a better chance of staying closer to normal or even slightly cooler than normal. Then we look toward the final days of August. The heat does not simply disappear. A large warm zone is still expected across much of the country. Again, parts of the Northeast have a better chance of escaping the worst of it. And when we look farther toward the end of August and beginning of September, another small change appears. Around the Great Lakes, there are hints that cooler air could begin showing up more often. Not winter air, not a giant Arctic blast, just the first little signs that summer may finally be losing some of its strength in the northern part of the country. But that is not what is happening farther south. There, summer may actually become more intense before it starts weakening. That is the conflict that will control the next couple of weeks. A giant area of heat wants to remain locked across the center and southern part of the country. Cooler air wants to move around its northern and eastern edge. Neither side completely wins. That creates a kind of weather tug-of-war. And if you happen to live close to the line between them, your forecast could change much faster than someone living deep inside the heat. One day can feel humid and warm. A front comes through. The next morning feels comfortable. Then the warm air builds again. The temperature climbs. Another front approaches. Storms develop. Then everything changes again. But deep inside the hottest part of the pattern, there may be far fewer changes. And that is where the real danger begins. Because heat becomes much more serious when the atmosphere starts trapping it in the same place. To understand why this heat could become so stubborn, we need to look at what is happening above the country. And strangely enough, the easiest way to understand it is by thinking about something sitting on your kitchen stove. Section 1. The heat is getting locked in. Think about boiling water. Turn the burner on for a short time and the water gets warm. Leave it on longer and the temperature keeps climbing. Then put a lid over the pot. Now the heat has an even harder time escaping. The atmosphere can sometimes do something very similar. Right now, forecasts show a huge area of very warm air building high above the western and central United States. You cannot see this warm area. There is no giant wall in the sky. But you can see what it does. Under this kind of pattern, air tends to move downward. And when air moves downward, it becomes harder for large clouds to grow. Fewer clouds mean more sunshine can reach the ground. More sunshine heats the ground. The ground heats the air above it. Day after day, that heat can build. And if the giant warm zone does not move, the process simply starts again the next morning. By the final week of August, the strongest heat concerns are expected across parts of the southern and central plains, southern Rockies, southwest, and nearby parts of the Mississippi Valley. That covers an enormous amount of land. Millions of people could experience temperatures well above what is normal for late August. Some places may climb above 100 degrees. And in humid areas, the number of people actually feel on their skin could become much higher. Anyone who has walked outside on an extremely humid day already knows the difference. 95 degrees in dry air is bad enough. 95 degrees with heavy humidity can feel like the air itself is pressing against your body. Sweat does not evaporate as easily. Your body has a harder time cooling itself. You feel tired faster. And what seemed like a normal outdoor job can suddenly become dangerous. Then nighttime arrives. People expect relief, but sometimes it does not come. That may be one of the most important parts of this heat event. The human body needs cooler nights. Homes need cooler nights. Cities need cooler nights. When temperatures remain high after sunset, roads and buildings continue releasing the heat they collected all afternoon. Concrete gives it back. Brick gives it back. Roofs give it back. Parking lots give it back. The whole city can stay warm long after the sun disappears. Now the next day begins from a higher starting point. Instead of cooling down properly overnight, everything is already warm when the sun returns. Then another afternoon of heat begins. Do that once, and it is uncomfortable. Do it several days in a row, and the effects begin stacking up. Older adults can struggle. People who work outside can become exhausted. Homes without strong air conditioning can become difficult to cool. Power use rises. Air conditioners run almost constantly, and the land begins changing. That land may become one of the most important parts of the whole story. Soil carries water. After it rains, some water stays near the surface. Plants pull some of it upward. Some of it slowly evaporates. That moisture helps the ground stay cooler. But remove the rain and add intense sunshine. The soil starts drying. Once the ground becomes dry, something strange happens. More of the sun's energy goes directly into heating the land instead of helping water evaporate. The land gets hotter. That hotter ground heats the air. The air gets hotter. That extra heat dries the land even more. Now the weather has created a loop. Heat dries the ground. Dry ground makes it easier to heat the air. Hotter air dries the ground faster. And each day begins helping the next one become hotter. That is why forecasters are watching the risk of rapid drought development across parts of the plains and Mississippi Valley. Some places have already received much less rain than they normally would. Now the atmosphere may add another stretch of dry and hot weather. At first, the changes may look small. A lawn loses some color. The soil becomes dusty. Plants start looking tired during the afternoon. A pond drops a little. Then another week passes. The roots of plants begin losing access to moisture. Farmers need more water. Small trees become stressed. Creeks can run lower. Dry grass begins collecting across open land. The more vegetation dries out, the easier it becomes for fire to spread. And this is where hot weather can become a much bigger problem. A lightning strike that would normally hit damp ground could hit dry grass instead. A small spark from equipment can become more serious. Strong wind can move flames faster. It does not mean a giant wildfire is guaranteed. It means the environment becomes more ready to burn. That difference matters. Weather disasters often happen when several smaller problems line up at the same time. Heat alone may not create a crisis. Dry ground alone may not create a crisis. Strong wind alone may not create a crisis. But combine heat, dry vegetation, wind, and one spark, and suddenly the situation changes. The Southwest can face an even stranger version of this. Arizona and New Mexico are used to very hot weather, but extreme heat remains dangerous no matter how familiar it is. During the final part of August, the strongest warm zone is expected to shift closer to parts of the Southwest and Southern Rockies. That means some desert areas could face even more intense heat. At the same time, this is normally the season when the Southwest hopes for bursts of moisture and thunderstorms. Those storms can bring badly needed rain, but they can also create another danger, flash flooding. The desert can look completely dry. Then a thunderstorm forms miles away over higher ground. Heavy rain falls very quickly. The water runs downhill. A dry creek that looked harmless suddenly begins filling. Water races through a canyon, and someone standing under blue sky can suddenly be facing floodwater coming from a storm they could not even see. That is one of the strangest things about desert weather. Drought and flooding can happen almost beside each other. One neighborhood gets little rain, another gets hit by a sudden downpour. The region stays dry overall, but one small area floods. Then the storm disappears and the heat returns. That is why the atmosphere can be so dangerous when it becomes stuck. The same pattern keeps creating different problems around its edges. Inside the heat, temperatures build. Near the edge, storms can fire. In dry places, lightning can become a concern. Where rain repeats, flooding can become the problem. But there is one question that naturally follows. If this giant warm zone is so powerful, why does the Northeast have a better chance of staying cooler? Why is that corner of the country escaping some of the worst heat, while much of the South does not? The answer comes from the strange shape of the atmosphere. The giant warm area looks a little like a mountain in the sky. Air has to move around it. On the western side, weather systems bend around the heat. Across the northern side, cooler air can sometimes travel along the top. And on the eastern side, that cooler air can occasionally drop farther south. That is why the Northeast has a better chance of seeing relief. But there is a catch. The border between hot air and cooler air is rarely quiet. It is often exactly where the most changeable weather develops. And that takes us to the next part of this forecast. Because while people deep inside the heat may be begging for rain, some areas near the eastern edge may soon be watching for too much of it. Section 2. The edge could turn stormy. The heat dome does not sit over the country like a perfect circle. Its edge bends, it twists, it moves. One day it expands, another day it weakens slightly. Cooler air pushes against one side, warm air pushes back, and wherever those different air masses meet, the weather gets more complicated. That battle zone is where fronts can slow down. It is where humidity can collect. It is where clouds grow. And it is where storms sometimes travel over the same places again and again. The Northeast is sitting closer to that battle. This is one reason parts of that region have a better chance of avoiding the strongest heat. Cooler air has an easier path into the area. But cooler weather does not always mean quiet weather. If a front moves into a region and then slows down, rain can begin following that boundary. Think of a front like a road in the sky. Moist air travels toward it. Clouds begin forming along it. Thunderstorms follow it. As long as the front keeps moving, the storms usually move along too. But if the front stops, everything can begin piling up. It is like traffic reaching a red light. One car stops, then another, then another. Soon there's a long line. Moisture can do something similar along a stalled front. One storm forms, another develops behind it. Rain falls over the same general area. Then another round arrives later. The amount from one storm may not be huge, but repeated rain can add up. Parts of the East Coast may have to watch for exactly that kind of setup during the final week of August. The area from coastal South Carolina north toward the Delmarva region is one place being watched for a better chance of heavier rain. Right now, this is not a forecast for some enormous flood disaster. That distinction is important. The signal is there, but the exact position of the front still matters. Move the boundary 50 or 100 miles, and the heaviest rain moves with it. A coastal town may get soaked. A city farther inland may see only scattered showers. One county could get several storms. Another nearby county could stay mostly dry. This is why forecasts near these weather boundaries can change so quickly. The atmosphere is not changing its mind. The front is simply moving. A shift that looks tiny on a national map can completely change what happens in your neighborhood. The same idea applies farther north. Around the Great Lakes, the forecast becomes more interesting as August ends. There are early signs that some cooler Canadian air could begin reaching the region more often. Again, this is not winter air. The calendar still says August. Canada does not have a giant supply of January cold sitting there waiting to pour south. But after weeks of summer heat, even a moderate temperature drop can feel dramatic. A day in the middle, 70s after repeated days near 90, feels completely different. An overnight low in the 50s can suddenly make you want the windows open. The morning air feels lighter, the humidity drops. For the first time in weeks, going outside does not immediately feel exhausting. That is what the first signs of fall often look like. Not snow, not freezing temperatures, just a change in the feel of the air. And around the Great Lakes and parts of the Northeast, those small changes may become more common as we get closer to September. But the heat farther south may still refuse to leave. That creates a giant temperature difference from one part of the country to another. And temperature differences help create weather. Warm air moves north, cooler air moves south. Moisture gets pulled into the middle. Storms can develop where those air masses meet. Some of those thunderstorms could contain strong wind or hail depending on the daily setup. But it is important not to take a broad national pattern and turn it into a tornado forecast. A large warm zone does not automatically mean tornadoes. A front does not automatically mean severe weather. Each day needs the right ingredients. The point is simply that the edge of the heat is more likely to stay active than the center of it. That is where rain has a better chance. That is where fronts have a better chance. And that is where the weather can change faster. Farther south, around parts of the Tennessee Valley and nearby areas, this boundary may eventually become important for rain as we move toward the beginning of September. At the same time, areas farther south, including parts of Florida and far south Texas, may lean drier. That can sound confusing. Florida is surrounded by warm ocean water. Texas can receive moisture from the Gulf. How can places with so much water nearby still be dry? Because having water nearby is not enough. The atmosphere has to allow that moisture to rise. Under the strongest part of a warm dome, air is trying to sink. Sinking air can act like a ceiling. Warm, humid air may sit near the ground, but thunderstorms struggle to grow tall enough. 100 miles north, near a front, air may be rising instead. That is where clouds and rain develop. So one region gets soaked while another stays hot and dry. It can look unfair. But the atmosphere does not divide rain equally. It follows the pattern. And then there's another part of the map people watch very closely at this time of year. The Atlantic Ocean. Late August usually gets people's attention. The water is warm. Hurricane season is moving closer to its busiest period. Tropical waves move west from Africa. People start checking hurricane maps every morning. One strange group of thunderstorms appears over the ocean, and social media immediately begins sharing computer models. But right now, something surprising is happening. The Atlantic is quiet. As of August 19th, the National Hurricane Center does not expect a tropical cyclone to form in the Atlantic, Caribbean Sea, or Gulf during the next 7 days. That is very good news. But do not misunderstand what that means. It does not mean hurricane season is over. It does not mean September will stay quiet. It does not mean nothing can develop later. It simply means the official outlook is quiet right now. A 7-day forecast is not a 2-month forecast. The Atlantic can change. And we are still moving toward a part of the year when hurricanes deserve close attention. But while the Atlantic is surprisingly calm, something much larger is happening on the other side of the country. Far out across the Pacific Ocean, a huge pool of warm water is strengthening. You may already know its name, El Niño, but the version developing right now is getting very serious attention, and what is happening in that ocean could eventually matter far beyond the Pacific itself. Section 3. The Pacific is waking up. The Pacific Ocean is enormous. It is so large that changes happening thousands of miles away can eventually affect weather patterns over North America. Right now, a huge stretch of ocean near the equator is much warmer than normal. That warmth has been growing. And NOAA says El Niño is strengthening. The agency now says there is a greater than 90% chance that this becomes a very strong El Niño during the fall and winter. That is a major signal. But here's where people sometimes get El Niño wrong. It is not a giant switch. El Niño does not turn on and suddenly make it rain in California. It does not automatically stop Atlantic hurricanes. It does not decide the temperature in your town next Tuesday. It changes the background. Think of a football field with a strong wind blowing from one end. The wind does not decide who wins. Players still make decisions. The ball can still move in either direction. But the wind changes the conditions of the game. El Niño does something similar to the atmosphere. The ocean becomes unusually warm. That extra warmth changes where large groups of thunderstorms form over the tropical Pacific. Those thunderstorms push huge amounts of air upward. That air then spreads outward high in the atmosphere. And those changes can slowly affect the paths that weather systems follow around the world. The Pacific right now is not simply a little warmer than normal. Parts of it are much warmer. And the warmth extends below the surface. That matters. A thin layer of warm water can cool more easily. A deeper pool of warmth contains much more stored energy. It is like comparing a warm puddle to a warm swimming pool. The puddle changes quickly. The pool takes much longer. The deep warmth is one reason forecasters expect El Niño to remain with us for many months. The current outlook expects it to continue through at least the Northern Hemisphere spring of 2027. So this is not just a late August weather story. This could become one of the biggest climate stories of the coming fall and winter, but we have to be careful about jumping too far ahead. A strong El Niño changes the odds of certain weather patterns. It does not guarantee them. Winter storms still depend on smaller patterns. Rain still depends on where individual weather systems travel. Cold air still has to be available. The atmosphere has many moving pieces. El Niño is one very big piece, but it is still one piece. What makes it interesting right now is that it is strengthening at the same time as the northern hemisphere begins moving toward fall. As the seasons change, the atmosphere becomes more sensitive to what is happening over the Pacific. That means forecasters will pay closer attention to El Niño over the coming weeks, and we may begin seeing its fingerprints more clearly as autumn gets closer. The longer range outlook already keeps warmth favored across much of the west and south as August ends and September begins. There's a cooler signal around the Great Lakes. The Northeast remains more uncertain. That does not mean El Niño directly caused the current heat dome. Weather is not that simple, but it means the atmosphere is entering the next season with a powerful ocean pattern developing underneath it. And that can affect what kinds of weather become more likely later. The hurricane side of the story is also interesting. El Niño can sometimes create stronger winds high over parts of the Atlantic. Those winds can make it harder for tropical storms to organize. A young tropical system needs its thunderstorms to stay stacked together. Strong winds high above the ocean can push the tops of those storms away from the center. It is like trying to build a tall tower while someone keeps pushing the top sideways. That can hurt development. But again, it does not make hurricanes impossible. This is important. One of the biggest mistakes people make with weather is turning probabilities into promises. El Niño can make the Atlantic less friendly for some storms, but a hurricane only needs one favorable area. One storm reaching one coastline is enough to create a disaster. That is why a quiet Atlantic today should never become a reason to ignore the rest of hurricane season. And preparedness works exactly the same way. You do not prepare because someone has promised your town will get hit. You prepare because if the day ever comes when something does happen, it is too late to begin from zero. That is true for hurricanes. It is true for tornadoes. It is true for wildfires. It is true for floods. It is true for long power outages. The type of emergency changes. The value of having a plan does not. There is another side of El Niño people often forget. The Pacific itself can become more active. Tropical systems over the eastern and central Pacific may have better chances of developing during certain periods. Even when those storms never make a direct landfall on the United States, they can still change the weather. A tropical system far off Mexico can send moisture north. Arizona suddenly becomes more humid. Thunderstorms increase, rain hits desert mountains, flash flood risk rises. A storm can be hundreds of miles away and still affect your forecast. That shows how connected the entire system is. Warm Pacific water changes thunderstorms. Thunderstorms change winds high in the sky. Those winds influence larger weather patterns. The larger pattern changes where heat builds. The edge of the heat changes where storms travel. Those storms change the soil. The condition of the soil can then change how hot the next day becomes. Everything keeps feeding into something else. That is why weather becomes so hard to understand when you only look at one map. A temperature map tells one story. A rainfall map tells another. A drought map tells another. An ocean temperature map tells another. Put them together and suddenly you see the larger machine. And that machine is moving. The Pacific is warming. The heat dome is building. The plains are drying. The Northeast has a better chance for cooler air. The Great Lakes may see more relief later. Part of the East Coast may have to watch for heavier rain. And the Atlantic is quiet for the moment. The final question is what all of this means for the actual days ahead. Because most people do not care about a giant pattern just because it looks interesting on a weather map. You care because you need to know whether the heat gets worse, whether rain is coming, whether the storms move closer, whether your family plans need to change, and whether September actually brings relief. So let us finish with what the next 2 weeks could look like. Section 4, the next 2 weeks. The first thing to understand is that this pattern will not arrive everywhere at once. The atmosphere is still changing. Smaller fronts will keep moving. Individual thunderstorms will still happen. Clouds can make one day cooler than expected. A front can briefly lower the temperature. A storm can drop the temperature 20 degrees in an hour. But none of those small changes necessarily means the larger heat pattern is finished. That larger pattern favors warmth rebuilding over the western, central, and southern parts of the country as we move toward the final week of August. The period around August 24th through August 28th is where the national split becomes clearer. Across much of the West, the odds favor warmer than normal conditions. Across the Central Plains, the odds favor warmth. Across the Southern Plains, the warm signal becomes even stronger. Much of the Southeast also leans warmer than normal. The Northeast is one of the biggest exceptions. That region has a better chance of temperatures staying around normal or dropping somewhat below normal. So if you live in Texas, Oklahoma, or parts of Kansas, your biggest story is likely the heat. There may still be a thunderstorm. There may still be a temporary front. But the larger setup makes it difficult for cooler air to stay. Texas also has a stronger signal for dry weather. That matters because the ground can lose moisture very quickly when temperatures climb. The first few days may simply feel hot, but if the pattern continues, the landscape starts showing what the heat is doing. Lawns turn brown, watering becomes more important. Farm fields become stressed. Dry vegetation increases, and the heat becomes easier to rebuild. Across parts of the Mississippi Valley, the story is similar. This is one of the regions where rapid drought development is a concern. Again, that does not mean every town suddenly enters a major drought. It means conditions are moving in a direction that can become much worse quickly. Rain shortages already exist. Now, high temperatures and more dry weather may arrive. That is how a small problem can become a bigger one. Then move west toward Arizona and New Mexico. Here, the late August heat could become especially intense. The strongest part of the big warm zone is expected to shift toward the southwest and southern Rockies. In desert areas, temperatures above 100 degrees are nothing new. But long-lasting extreme heat still creates serious danger. The human body does not care whether a temperature is normal for Arizona. Extreme heat is extreme heat. Outdoor workers still face risk. Older adults still face risk. Pets still face risk. People without good air conditioning still face risk. And a car left in the sun still becomes dangerously hot. Then add dry ground. Add the possibility of scattered desert thunderstorms. One place can be dealing with dangerous heat. Another can be dealing with flash flooding. Another can stay completely dry. That is why local conditions matter so much. Now move north toward the northern plains. The forecast becomes less locked. The area is closer to the northern edge of the giant warm zone. That gives fronts more opportunities to pass through. Warm air can build. Then a front drops south. Temperatures fall. A few days later, warm air moves back. Then another front approaches. That up and down pattern may become much more noticeable than what happens farther south. Around the Great Lakes, the cooler side may become even more noticeable toward the final days of August and beginning of September. There are early signs favoring some below normal temperatures in that region during the longer outlook. Again, we're not talking about winter. But after a hot summer, the difference can feel huge. An afternoon in the 70s feels comfortable. A morning in the 50s feels almost shocking. Windows open. Air conditioners finally stop running. People go outside again. You can feel the season beginning to shift. But then move 1,000 miles south, and it may still feel like the middle of summer. That is the strange part. America may not enter fall together. The northern part of the country may begin seeing small signs first. The south could keep dealing with intense heat. And between those two areas sits the moving line where storms and fronts keep developing. The northeast is especially interesting. The region has a better chance of staying out of the worst heat, but it may also stay closer to the wetter side of the pattern. The East Coast, especially from parts of the Carolinas toward the mid-Atlantic, has a chance of seeing a slow-moving front and heavier rain during a part of the final week of August. The exact location remains important. A small shift could completely change which cities get the most rain. That is something to keep watching. And then we arrive around August 26th through August 30. This may be the most serious part of the heat story. Parts of the Southwest, Southern Rockies, Central Plains, Southern Plains, and Mississippi Valley are expected to face the greatest risk of extreme heat during this period. The area of possible heat is much larger than the small center of the worst conditions. That means even places outside the highest risk zone may still experience uncomfortable or dangerous temperatures. And this heat may continue toward September in some locations. That is the key difference between a heat wave and a random hot day. Duration. If tomorrow is 101 degrees and the next day is 85, your house can cool, the ground can recover, your body gets a break. But if tomorrow is 101, the next day is 102, the night stays warm, then another 100-degree afternoon arrives. That is a very different situation. The stress builds, the ground dries, air conditioners work harder, the power system carries more demand, people sleep worse, outdoor workers become more tired, health problems can slowly increase, and even small mistakes become more dangerous. Leaving someone in a car, walking a pet on hot pavement, working outside too long without water, ignoring signs of heat illness. That is why long-lasting heat deserves respect even when there is no dramatic storm on radar. A hurricane announces itself. You see the giant swirl. A tornado warning makes your phone scream. A flood covers roads. Heat is quieter. The sky may be perfectly blue. The neighborhood may look normal, and yet the weather can still become deadly. That quiet danger is something people sometimes underestimate. The drought side can be quiet too. There is no giant wall of dust arriving on the first day. There is simply less rain, then more heat. Then the grass dries, then the soil dries, then streams drop, then fire conditions become easier to create. By the time the problem looks dramatic, it has sometimes been building for weeks. So what would finally break this pattern? A strong enough change in the air above North America. The giant warm center would need to weaken, move, or become disturbed enough for cooler air to push farther south. That can happen. Late August is moving toward September. Days are becoming shorter. The sun is slowly losing strength in the northern states. Canada will gradually become cooler. That gives future cold fronts a little more power. But right now, the latest outlook does not show one giant cold front suddenly clearing the heat from the entire United States. That may be disappointing if you are waiting for fall in Texas or Oklahoma. The better chance for meaningful relief begins farther north and east. The Great Lakes, parts of the Northeast, perhaps nearby areas depending on how far the fronts can travel. Farther south, any relief may be shorter and less reliable. A front could arrive, temperatures fall, then the heat dome pushes back. Warm air returns. That back and forth fight is likely one of the most important things to watch. And it can create another trap for people following long-range forecasts. You may see one computer map 10 days away showing cool air reaching deep into the south. A few hours later, another map keeps the cold hundreds of miles farther north. Then another run shifts everything again. That does not mean forecasting is useless. It means the exact edge is uncertain. The farther into the future you look, the more careful you have to be with details. It is much easier to say there's a large warm pattern than to say your city will be exactly 87 degrees 11 days from now. The broad pattern comes first. The local details become clearer later. Right now, confidence is much stronger in the idea of major southern heat than in the idea of a huge nationwide cold blast. That is one of the most important things to understand. The heat signal is strong. The Northeast cooler signal is real. The later Great Lakes cooler signal is worth watching. But there is not strong support right now for summer suddenly ending across the entire country. Instead, it may end slowly. The northern states begin getting more comfortable mornings. The south keeps baking. The boundary between them moves around. Storms follow that boundary. September gets closer. The days continue getting shorter. Eventually, the balance begins shifting. That is how summer usually loses. Not in one dramatic moment. It slowly runs out of places to hide. But until that happens, the final days of August could still become extremely difficult for parts of the country. And this is exactly why weather preparedness should not only happen when a named hurricane is moving toward your state. Emergencies do not always arrive with 5 days of warning. A severe storm can knock out power tonight. Flash flooding can cut off a road in minutes. A wildfire can force evacuations much faster than people expect. A tornado can develop inside a storm that looked ordinary earlier in the day. A hurricane can change direction. A heat wave can place huge pressure on the electrical grid. And when something finally happens, almost everyone suddenly wants the same things: water, food, light, power, medicine, information, a safe place, a way to contact family, a plan for where to go. Those things are easy to think about while everything is normal. They become much harder when stores are crowded, roads are blocked, electricity is gone, or everyone in the house is scared. That is the lesson hidden inside almost every disaster. The emergency is not the best time to create the plan. The plan needs to exist before the emergency. So as we move through the final days of August, here is the weather story to remember. The country is splitting into different zones. A strong and stubborn area of heat is taking control across much of the south, plains, southwest, and nearby regions. Some of those areas may face temperatures above 100 degrees and dangerous heat that lasts for several days. Parts of the plains and Mississippi Valley may dry out quickly. That drying can stress farms, vegetation, and water supplies, while increasing the chance that fire conditions become more serious. The Southwest may face intense heat while still dealing with isolated thunderstorms and the danger of sudden flash flooding. Parts of the East Coast may have to watch a slower-moving front capable of bringing heavier rain. The Northeast has one of the better chances of avoiding the strongest heat. The Great Lakes may begin getting the first more noticeable hints of cooler weather as we move toward September. The Atlantic is quiet for now, but hurricane season is far from finished. And across the Pacific, El Niño is strengthening quickly and could become a major part of the weather story as fall and winter get closer. Put all of that together, and one thing becomes clear. The atmosphere is changing. But it is not changing in the simple way many people expect. There is no giant switch where summer suddenly turns off. One part of the country may begin feeling the first hints of fall. Another part may experience some of the most difficult heat of the final weeks of summer. One area may need rain desperately. Another may be watching for too much rain. One region may be calm. Another may be dealing with storms. And all of those conditions can shift as we move closer to September. That is why knowing the forecast matters. But knowing the forecast is only the first half of being ready. The second half is knowing exactly what your family will do when normal life suddenly stops being normal. If the power disappeared tonight, how long could your household function? If a wildfire, hurricane, flood, or another emergency forced you to leave quickly, would everyone know what to take? Would you know where to meet if phone service stopped working? Would you have the important supplies ready? Would everyone in your family know the plan? Or would you be trying to answer all of those questions after the emergency had already begun? That is exactly why we put together the Family Disaster Survival System. It is designed to help you think through those decisions ahead of time and build a practical survival plan for your household, so you are not starting from zero when something goes wrong. You do not need to wait for a hurricane to appear on the map. You do not need to wait for a tornado warning. You do not need to wait until the power goes out or the roads begin flooding. Preparation works best while everything is still normal. If you want to get the Family Disaster Survival System, the link is in the description and in the top comment. Get it, go through it with your family, and use the calm days to prepare for the days that might not be calm. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what is the one disaster your family would be least prepared for if it happened tonight? Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.